All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining me today. I hope everyone is enjoying a virtual pharmacy so far. My name is Sabrina Belserio, and I'm the head of operations for LARVOL. And the topic of today's presentation is When Technology Alone Doesn't Cut It, Human Curation in Social Listening. So today I'm going to share with you a little bit about what our team has learned about expert curated social listening and why it's valuable for CI teams. Some of the items that we'll look at include how we've used social listening within the oncology space to identify key opinion leaders. And then we'll look at a case study of how we use social listening to capture KOL activity during the ESMO 2020 virtual Congress. So to get started, I'll share a little bit about LARVOL. So we are a technology company that specializes in providing expert curated data to support the needs of the pharmaceutical industry and our biotech consumers. We were founded in 2004, and we work with some of the top pharma companies within the US. Unique about our team is that we have about over 120 members across the globe that work fully remotely, and this has been our business model since we were founded. Our product offering includes customized market intelligence reports, a pre-conference planning solution, a KOL monitoring and tracking tool, and the latest addition to our family, a database of predictive cancer biomarkers. So we'll start off by looking at how we've leveraged social listening as a tool for KOL mapping. So we had two objectives in mind when it came to KOL mapping. The first thing that we wanted to do was to identify who were truly influential within the oncology space on Twitter. So how did we do that? We started by having a team of analysts monitor Twitter for any buzzworthy oncology news. And types of news would range from clinical trial data releases, FDA approvals, as well as new guideline decisions. We found that by identifying the most talked about news, we were able to discover the oncologists that were reacting to that news and participating in those conversations. And that was really the foundation for us to build out our list. The second objective was to rank those oncologists based on their level of engagement. So we did this by measuring how frequently they reacted to news, but not only that, we assessed the quality of their comments as well. Two important items to note about our methodology. First is that we only collected reactions from oncologists. And the second is that we verified that they were in fact oncologists by checking their LinkedIn or by performing keyword searches on Google. So this here is a snapshot of our list of over 300 top oncologists that our team has curated over the course of the past few months. We put together this list by selecting only oncologists who are active in discussing clinical discussions. Months ago, we attempted at putting together this same list, but we did it using an automated software alone. And that software would scan Twitter for their bio to make sure that they were an MD, and then pulled number of followers, location, and a few other metrics as well. What's interesting for us is how different our curated list looks compared to the automated list that we generated months ago. What we found is that from the oncologists that were identified through the automated list, only a very small percentage of them were actually influential. Or were true opinion leaders. A lot of them may have had a lot of followers, but they had retired, or they weren't active on Twitter at all, or they weren't discussing news that was related to oncology. So the biggest takeaway point for us here is that in identifying true opinion leaders in any space, it's something that needs to be done through a process of human curation, and it can't be left to technology alone. So now we'll turn to a case study to examine how we use social listening to capture the activity of oncologists during ESMO this year. So as we came across discussions of trial data presented at ESMO, our team collected these reactions and conducted sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is the process of understanding the mood or the tone behind a comment, and it's truly at the core of social listening. We typically code our reactions as positive, negative, or neutral. This is a bit of a subjective process, but we try to follow some general guidelines. For example, a positive or a negative tweet would represent a scenario where an oncologist is clearly favorable or non-favorable towards the data. A reaction is coded as neutral when the oncologist doesn't take a clear position either way, or if they're simply repeating or restating data from the study that we're already aware of, or if there's mixed sentiments within a single comment. For us, reactions are not considered to be meaningful if they don't address the study or they don't address the data within the study. So for an example, if an oncologist were to retweet but not leave a comment, that would not be included in our analysis. We realized that in some cases, this coding system of positive, negative, neutral can be viewed as oversimplistic. But we found over time and with testing other types of reactions, we think that this methodology is really the best way to represent the data. We have received feedback from oncologists, particularly in scenarios where they felt that we've coded their reactions incorrectly and prompting us to change it, of course. We like when this happens because number one, it shows us that there's interest in the community in what we're doing. But second, it also serves as an additional layer of QC, and it ensures that we are accurately representing their reactions. So this is my favorite slide. This is our heat map. This heat map gives us a visual representation of the top presentations from ESMO 2020, as well as the level of engagement from oncologists. It's organized in such a way that the oncologists who are most active appear at the top, or the ones that comment the most frequently appear at the top, and those who comment less frequently would appear at the bottom. All of the reactions within the heat map are hyperlinked to the original tweet as well. An important thing to note here is that there's no correlation between the level of engagement that an oncologist engages in and the number of followers that they have. So if we look at, for example, our top oncologist, he has under 1,000 followers, and I know it's not listed here on the heat map, but he has the most reactions and the least amount of followers. From the heat map as well, we can also get a quick read on which trials were the more controversial compared to others. So for example, if we look at Impassion 131, it had a mix of mostly neutral with some negative reactions. And then if we compare it to a trial like Ascent, that had neutral with more positive tones. If we look at the data horizontally, we can also get insights into the behavior patterns of oncologists. So for example, we may find that some have the tendency to always react neutral. Others may be more critical towards the data. So again, if we look at our top oncologist, we see that he has a mix of positive, negative, and neutral responses. After capturing so much data, particularly from conferences, one of the key findings for us is that there's actually a small percentage of our influencer group that represents a majority of the activity. So it's a small group of people doing a lot of the talking. On one hand, we feel that we've really captured the core group of individuals who are driving conversations and who have a true influence within the online oncology community. On the other hand, we do continue to capture reactions from all oncologists on Twitter because we want to make sure that all voices are heard. So as we come towards the end of the presentation, I wanted to conclude with a summary of key findings. The first key finding is that we can and we should pursue social listening within the pharma industry. And there's many reasons why. The first is that there's been a rising interest from pharma in social listening. Also, with the impact of COVID, activity is increasingly moving towards the online environment, meaning that there's a high volume of rich data that exists online, and there's a lot of insights that we can pull from it. We also find Twitter to be a hotspot for clinical activity and for discussions of clinical activity compared to other platforms like LinkedIn, for example, hence why we focused most of our efforts there. So if you're in CI and you're not on Twitter, you certainly should be. Aside from the reasons that I mentioned just now, social listening really gives you firsthand insights into key conversations. And not only that, it gives you the ability to directly engage with the opinion leaders that matter to you. The second takeaway point for us is that if you're going to do social listening, it has to be done through human curation. So everything from finding the news, culling down what is the most relevant or trending, identifying and verifying opinion leaders, all the way down to extracting sentiment and interpreting reactions. These are all things that can only be done with a trained team of analysts. Technology can play a role in social monitoring, and that's the broader process of searching for and collecting data through automated tools. But on its own, it can't achieve the level of analysis that we've shown you here today. So that concludes the presentation. Now, before we dive into Q&A, I do want to mention that for any member of the audience who is interested in receiving our list of top oncologists or our ESMO heat map, feel free to reach out to me after the presentation.
Hi, Sabrina, it's Diana. Thanks so much for the presentation. While I wait to see if any questions come up in the queue, a couple things. So I absolutely loved the title of your presentation because I'm always of the mindset that you can use technology to a point and maybe it can get you to the insights better, faster, more efficiently, but nothing takes the place of that human layer of intelligence, right? So I absolutely agree with you on that point. Are you using any technology at all, at least initially, to kind of go through Twitter to like at least gather the data and dump the data, or are people actually just following these KOLs?
So we experimented with using some automated tools like Keyhole, for example, to try and collect that data initially before our team of analysts dived in and did their analysis. But we actually found that in some cases created more work for us. So now we are doing this process completely manually.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that some of the oncologists, you've gotten feedback from them, they've reached back out because maybe they didn't like the way you assess them. Do they, I mean, how did they come into contact with you? Do they just send you an email, or are they, tweeting back at you, or you know what I mean?
They're tweeting back at us. So our efforts in oncology, we anytime we cover a conference or any piece of news, we usually publish it to Twitter and to LinkedIn. So that's where they'll see it, and that's their opportunity to comment and say, hey, I wasn't negative, I didn't mean that, and so that would be the forum.
How many have you changed assessments based on those reactions?
Over the course of the past 3 months, I would say we get maybe 1 to 2 a month at most. So it does happen, and we do change their reactions.
Let me check, just make sure I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm not taking up all your time on questions. I know you mentioned you're mainly using Twitter. I find for some of the social listening tracking that I'm doing, the same. LinkedIn for the kind of information we're after isn't really the best place to go. Have you looked at maybe Instagram or Facebook or Reddit to see if there's anything else that you might be able to add to what you're getting out of Twitter?
We did explore Facebook, not Instagram, but Facebook and YouTube as well. We found very minimal activity there. And a lot of the activity that we found was activity that we had already covered on Twitter. So, for example, if an oncologist were to take to Twitter and then also their YouTube, we would have pulled their Twitter reaction and considered it covered. So right now we've just focused on Twitter because we see that as really the place to be.
Yeah, kind of, I was happy to hear that. In a way, it kind of validates some of the work that we're doing, because we looked at YouTube and we looked at some of the other social listening feeds as well, and kind of find that if anybody, especially a KOL, is going to be really, putting themselves out there, they're going to do it on Twitter.
Right.
We haven't really found much on some of the other sites. And the last point I want you to elaborate on a little bit. It's really interesting when you said for the top, and I'm reading my notes, for the top oncologist, you found the ones that had the most reactions had the least amount of followers. And that's kind of interesting if you can just go into a little bit more detail around that, because one of the things I think that might trip people up is they'll look at how many followers somebody has and think right away, well, this person has, I don't know, thousands of followers, they must be very influential, where you're kind of saying maybe the opposite.
Right. So, I mean, it's not in all cases that the most influential will have the least followers. I think the point there is that having a large number of followers doesn't immediately correlate to this person engages frequently or puts out a lot of activity. Our top oncologists, some of them do have 5 to 20K followers, but others have under 1,000 and they're just as active. So followers can give you an idea of the number of followers can be important because it can show you how popular somebody is or how their ability to reach a wide audience. But looking at followers as a metric alone, it's not enough. You sort of need to understand how often they're actually participating in discussions online to decide if they're truly influential.
Great, thank you. And just one last thing I just want to quickly ask, as we're starting to run out of time. Have you done anything around from a patient perspective or a caregiver perspective? We're often asked, KOLs is one piece, but then using social listening around understanding that patient voice and how to discern a patient from a caregiver. So I'm just curious if you guys have done any work around that.
We haven't focused our efforts directly on patients, but throughout our analysis of different conversations, we are seeing patient advocates getting involved, patients speaking out on different topics as well. So we have discussed getting involved in those spaces, although we're not actively there yet, but it's certainly interesting to us.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I just checked the queue again. I didn't see any other questions. I'm assuming I asked what everybody else was thinking. So thank you so much for the presentation. It was great to actually do one live today. Yes. So really appreciate that, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks everyone for joining. Take care. Bye.